Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur, clutching a bedpan.
You do it so well, and it's very shiny.
I never thought I would see tough guy actor James Caan huddled up on a bed, just clutching a bedpan to his chest.
Is it a bed cam?
No, it's not. No, it's not, Scott.
No, you don't. No, you probably don't want what he's going to do to that on you, to be fair.
Cry into it?
I don't think that's what he was planning to do with that bedpan. But then again, I think some people might pay for that service. So
Sure.
who knows? Who knows? And yeah, we've got a great film to talk about this week, which we'll introduce in just a second. And yeah, we're heading back to the 1970s, a time full of nihilism and pessimism and narcissism and other isms.
Grit.
And and brawn and men crying into bedpans.
Forget John Wayne. The 70s was the true grit.
Well, it was, and it never got grittier.
Never again.
Well, until Anakin Skywalker came along and talked about his dislike for sand.
Oh, that's true. That's true. It gets everywhere.
It is the worst. It is the worst. It caused him to be a Sith. But that's a story for another day. Actually, that's a story on our Patreon if you want to go check out those prequel episodes over there. But, you know, I think I should, like, re-record our intro far more, like, moodier if we do a 70s film.
And mumble.
None of them mumble. Yeah, mumble them like what's that chap's name in this film?
There's several.
Burt Young is who I was thinking of.
Sure.
He mumbles his whole way through. I just need a hat to take on and off mid-conversation.
Yeah, it should be more like, welcome to Spy Hard's podcast. It's just low, and you're kind of like, what did he just say?
Yeah, I mean, you're taking me back to the early days of Spy Hards now, when we had inferior mics and even more inferior podcasting skills. But, you know, we've warmed it up a little bit, but let's get to it, Cam. What are we talking about this week?
We are talking about 1975's The Killer Elite, directed by famed director Sam Peckinpah and starring James Caan and Robert Duvall.
I mean, The Killer Elite is a great name for a film.
And it was a second time.
Yeah, it was the second time. Jason Statham, I think.
Yeah, Jason Statham and Robert De Niro. And when we decided to tackle this movie, I then thought, well, wait, was that a remake of this? Nope. Based on a different book, that film was. That was a very Yoda-like pronunciation of that sentence. But, yeah, completely separate. And I guess they just, in both cases, changed the names of their books to The Killer Elite and Killer Elite.
Oh, elite these killers are.
I just wonder if it was like someone was a fan of this movie working on Killer Elite.
Whoa, wait,
was
no,
like,
see, no. Your premise is flawed.
Okay. Spoilers perhaps for Scott's thoughts coming up. But yeah, I wonder if they were a fan of this movie and they wanted to pay homage in their own little way. So they just ripped off the title.
It could be, or they could just have gone for like generic word association things. We need like a hard sounding title for our film. The Killer Elite. Yeah, men.
But they dropped the second time.
Well, that's like, isn't that the meme now? Like you take the out of things and then you re-release it without the.
Yeah, it's like around that time period, it's The Fast and the Furious turning into Fast and Furious.
Yeah, exactly. The is just going to confuse people.
I'm confused all the time by the word the.
I mean, and to be fair, The Killer Elite or whatever you'd like to call this film is the antithesis of what we are.
Cool.
Well, I don't mean so much quality of the film, just the fact that like elite, no.
Oh, no.
You wouldn't hire us to do any of these jobs.
Maybe use a bedpan.
We are the bedpan.
We are indeed.
We are, which I think brings us beautifully into The Killer Elite. Now, if you haven't heard of this film, I don't necessarily blame you. I wouldn't necessarily call this a Spy Hard special, though.
No, I think as soon as you're dealing with a director like Sam Peckinpah, this falls into maybe a little obscure, but not a Spy Hard special. And it's actually interesting. I realized last night, and this is going to kind of merge timelines that are going on at this very moment for our recording schedule. But we are covering this movie mere days before we record the Patreon episode on Cross of Iron, which was also directed by Sam Peckinpah.
Oh, see, I thought that was intentional.
No, the Cross of Iron choice for the Patreon was a listener submission.
Ah. Oh, yeah, it was, of course. And actually, that'll be out before this is.
Right? Like, timelines are just looping all over the place right now.
See, the patrons on Patreon, you get spoiled over there. Like, you get pampered. Manicures, pedicures. We've got it all. Bedpans if you want.
And the patrons right now are listening to this going, psh, we already knew that.
Yeah. Old school. Ugh. Losers. But if you haven't seen The Killer Elite, much as we say it might be a film you've checked out, or at least a director you're aware of, definitely got some actors you've probably seen, here is your synopsis. And I will jump in because, now before I read this, we usually use letterbox.com for our synopsis.
Mm-hmm.
And I will read that. But there is one on IMDb that really just made me laugh. Like, I'm talking like the Mystery Man of the Balkans level of laugh.
Sure.
So which would you like first?
Surprise me.
Okay. Okay. Let's go with what we usually do, and I'll follow up with what I thought was funny. Which
Okay.
it could fall flat completely because I've said I think it's funny now, which is
Right.
it's a lot of pressure on this.
So there's going to be a lot of crickets when this is over.
Of course. I mean, there is whenever a Spy Hards episode finishes anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's our outro music.
Yeah.
Symphony of the Crickets.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering how many people actually make it to the end of an episode. Probably not when we just spend 20 minutes not talking about the film we're meant to talk about. Who knows? But here is the Killer Elite. They protect us from the enemy, but who protects us from them?
Very 70s.
Intrigue is building. Mike Locken is one of the principal members of a group of freelance spies. A significant portion of their work is for the CIA. And while on a case for them, one of his friends turns on him and shoots him in the elbow and knee. Very specific. His assignment to protect someone goes down in flames. He is nearly crippled, but with braces is able to again become mobile. For revenge as much as anything else, Mike goes after his ex-friend.
Okay. I feel like any comedy, it just flew right over my head.
Well, that wasn't the comedy one.
Oh, okay, good.
That was a letterbox one.
Okay.
Here is the one from IMDb that gave me pause.
Right.
In all caps, Men Wanted.
I mean, it was the 70s, and that was James Caan.
No comment. Private company with CIA contract seeks men willing to risk life. Perfect physical condition, experience with weaponry, incendiaries, karate, judo, and no loyalties, no dependents. Long career, doubtful.
Oh, okay. It's like a list. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a job advertisement. I think is what they wanted.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. We haven't stumbled across one like that before.
I mean, I think there are some posters with that as like the tagline, and then underneath it says Sam Peckinpah's The Killer Elite.
Who would be the funniest spy we've tackled where the synopsis would just be a list of job duties? Would it be Condor Man?
Well, I mean, he was a comic book artist anyway, so like
Yeah.
that was kind of his like day job. I want to see what like the advertisement is for someone who works for the Big O.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay.
Oh, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Nigel Smallfawcett would be interesting as well.
Well, he's just the attaché to the Bahamas.
Yeah, but it's like, what is that man like constantly having to justify his job?
I think he lives. I mean, much as the Never Say Never Again, like really, punches down at Rowan Atkinson. I think he lives a pretty good life.
He is in the Bahamas, so you can't go wrong there.
No, it's surrounded by beautiful people every day. Even if you look like Rowan Atkinson, eventually you're going to score.
That's true. You fall in enough hot tubs, who knows what's going to happen?
Exactly. And Cab tries. Trust me, folks.
We're going to Vegas soon. I can't wait.
Blup, blup, blup. But let's talk about the Killer Elite. It's safe to say that it's my first experience with the Killer Elite. I mean, I've put Men Wanted ads out many times, but not for this film.
Right. James Caan is not answering your letters.
No, he just sends me bedpans instead. I don't know why.
Although I don't think he can these days, but nonetheless, yeah. I had never seen this. I'd seen more Sam Peckinpah's well-known films, The Wild Bunch, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, The Getaway, movies like that. But when it comes to his more obscure stuff, I feel like I'm on kind of a disadvantage because I just haven't tackled that many movies that kind of fall into that sphere. And so this was one of them because when we added this to the list, I didn't even realize it was a Sam Peckinpah film.
Mm.
So, yeah, I was unfamiliar, but I was very excited to watch it because of past work I'd seen from him. And when you have a 70s film headlined by James Caan and Robert Duvall, this is just like, what, 3 years after The Godfather?
Yeah.
1 year after The Godfather 2. Although James Caan isn't really in The Godfather 2. He has like one scene, but nonetheless, this is like two of the biggest icons of the early 70s meeting up again in 75 for a movie that is shockingly kind of forgotten. Like, you would think that this would be kind of remembered as, remember when two of the biggest stars of The Godfather reunited 3 years later? And people are like, crickets, you know?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I sometimes do this when we're covering films. I'll post out on social media, like, now watching X for an upcoming episode. And I did post earlier on today about The Killer Elite, which would give you an idea of when we actually recorded this. And the response, I mean, I won't get into necessarily their thoughts or our thoughts. We'll do that, as the episode goes on. But there were a lot of people that have seen it. But I get the impression that it's kind of like a cult film, or like a film watcher's film. Like, I'm going through Sam Peckinpah's filmography. I'm going through James Caan's filmography, and you will go, "Oh, wow, this is in their filmography. I'll check it out." But I don't know, and I'm sure you'll fill this in shortly, that this was a hit at the cinema or in theaters, because I don't see it mentioned online. It's just because we're doing it that people are mentioning it.
Obviously. And I mean, spoiler, but like, I couldn't find any box office financial information for this one beyond a budget.
Wow.
So,
okay.
I mean, I just don't think it was a particularly popular movie. And its grosses have just been kind of lost to the sands of time.
And there's no like top 200 list of that year, and if it's on there or not, like, you just can't tell.
No, those lists don't really start until I think it's like the end of the 80s. And so when you get to the 70s, some movies, I could tell you, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I could give you all that information, but then something like this that clearly wasn't really connecting, it kind of gets, lost in the shuffle. I think it was a similar case. Don't test me on this one, but I think it was a similar case with the Macintosh Man.
Okay. A little bit of a throwback to Spy Hards many years ago, the Macintosh Man. I like that. And this is the same year as Jaws.
Yeah.
Just to give you context as to what you're seeing in cinemas.
Yeah, you were seeing a transition starting in film because you're going to have Jaws this year, and then 2 years later you'll have Star Wars, and then we're going to shift towards more of the blockbuster era of the 80s. And so this is kind of that early period. And like, it is kind of insane to watch something like this and consider this coming out in the same year as Jaws. Like, they just feel like they are doing such wildly different things, and both of them are... Spielberg's looking at kind of the future of what the opportunities will be in Hollywood and what you can make, whereas this feels, we are of now. This is a movie made on whatever day it was in 1974 or 5, reflecting what is going on now.
Well, I do have some theories as to why this film happened now and why this film is the way it is, but I think I'll leave that for once we've spoken about the reality, which is what you're going to tell us.
Right, yes. So, as I mentioned earlier, this was based on a book, and it also was a book with a different title. The book was called Monkey in the Middle, which...
Original working title for Spy Hards.
And Dr. No.
Very good, very good.
Thank you. And it was written by Robert Rostand. I'm not exactly sure the pronunciation, but it doesn't even matter because it's a fake name. The guy's name was really Robert...
I thought you were going to say because he's dead. I was like, that's harsh.
No, it's because his name was actually Robert Sid Hopkins, which is easier to pronounce. And so he had this pseudonym that he wrote novels under. And this was the first in the Mike Locken trilogy. There was actually 2 follow-ups to this novel, Monkey in the Middle. They were called Viper's Game and A Killing in Rome. And I did notice, like, if you look it up now, the first book is now renamed The Killer Elite. I think they realized it was smarter to try to sell books based, especially around this time period, on the movie, as opposed to sticking stubbornly to Monkey in the Middle.
Let's be fair. Much as we made a couple of jokes about the Killer Elite's title at the start, comparatively to Monkey in the Middle, I think I'll take the Killer Elite, especially if it's a book about, assassins and hitmen.
Yeah, I don't know what the tone of the book is. Like, maybe that title fits a little more. It would not fit this movie. And this author, Robert Sid Hopkins, didn't really have many other things adapted. Just one called Last Run was adapted into a 2001 straight-to-video movie starring Armand Assante. But beyond that, The Killer Elite is really the only theatrical feature generated from the works of Robert Sid Hopkins, a.k.a. Robert Rostand.
Rostand. I like that. I mean, to be fair, we can lob jokes around, but the guy made books and then had those books turned into, even if it was 2 films, that's 2 more films than we've ever done and multiple more books than we'll ever write.
Exactly, yes. But I am going to steal the title Monkey in the Middle now that they've changed to Killer Elite.
Well, to be fair, at least we know what's in that sandwich because you've got clowns to the left of you, jokers to the right, and here I am.
A monkey in the
with
middle.
The monkey in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. Then we finished the song.
So the original reports were that the author of the book would write the screenplay, and don't know what happened there. He's not on the film. So I don't know if they took a crack at it, they didn't like it, and went in a different direction. Don't know. Lost to the sands of time, as was the box office. So there was 2 screenwriters on this. I'll start with the first one, Mark Norman, who was born in California and started out in TV in the mid-'60s. And actually, one of his earlier credits was a 1970 episode of Mission Impossible.
Wow.
So he had a little bit of spy cred. Then he had a sole screenplay credit. This was his first movie on Stanley Kramer's 1973 oil drama, Oklahoma Crude, starring George C. Scott and Faye Dunaway. Another big star vehicle that I think is completely forgotten.
Faye Dunaway was in that?
Yeah.
An oil film?
Yeah, there was like a gas crisis going on in the 70s. I think this tied into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so this was actually his follow-up to the 1975 Charles Bronson action film Breakout, which I have not seen. And he really did not work much at all after that time period beyond 2 credits. This is interesting. He had 2 credits. One was being one of an army of writers working on Cutthroat Island in the 90s. And then the other one was co-writing Shakespeare in Love with Tom Stoppard. And he won the Oscar for screenplay and also for picture because that was his only ever producer credit.
So he produced and co-wrote that?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I have to assume, and this is, as I say, an assumption, that this is one of those chaps that actually did work the entirety of their career. But you don't know that because their IMDb is not full of films that were released.
Yeah.
You go back to Don McPherson, a very early Spy Master interview for us, who wrote The Avengers, the 1996 or 8 film.
8, yeah.
Yeah, and he has never stopped working, but his IMDb says it's been very quiet in the McPherson household.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, I mean, it's so bizarre to me that Mark Norman would not have been cranking out something post Shakespeare in Love.
Yeah.
Right?
Or at least been like hired to do something. Maybe it hadn't happened, but like...
Yeah.
Maybe that's the case. Maybe he was attached to do a bunch of things and just they never got made.
Possibly, yeah. And I do think like history has kind of remembered Tom Stoppard as being the more dominant writer of Shakespeare in Love. So I wonder if that's a bit of it too.
What do I know that name from? Has he done a spy film?
No, I don't. Maybe. You know what? Maybe we did cover something he did in the past. But that does kind of ring a bell. It's kind of like we talked to David Franzoni, who wrote Gladiator, right? And yet it tends to be John Logan, who you hear mentioned more with Gladiator.
Yeah, whereas from our conversation with him, a lot of the stuff that we did see was from David Franzoni.
Yeah, at the very least, like all kind of the story structure came from him.
I can answer the question for those who were screaming it at home. I went and looked it up. Tom Stoppard also wrote The Russia House.
Oh, okay. There you go. That was a while back for me.
Yeah. Hey, somehow I remembered it. That's more impressive.
Yeah, totally. And so the other writer they brought on, this guy had like some cred though. Like this was a good writer they had doing the first draft at least. And then they brought on Sterling Silliphant, who has an amazing name. That's the name I'll never get to say again, probably. We'll see. But he was a Detroit-born writer-producer and started out his career actually just after the war. He served in the war in World War II and then went to work for the Walt Disney Studios publicity department.
Cool.
And then went and worked for Fox. And then he was actually kind of like working within Disney for a little bit. But produced in 1953 a biopic on Joe Louis, the heavyweight boxer, called The Joe Louis Story. And then 2 years later, he writes and produces, and this kind of segs into him being a writer, the 1955 Kim Novak heist film, Five Against the House, which I hadn't heard of, but I actually want to watch now. That sounds actually really cool. And then he goes and works on the Mickey Mouse Club for a little bit and bounces between TV and movies. And he's doing a lot. He's quite prolific. And he wrote some of the screenplays he would do going forward. The 1960 Village of the Damned, which is a really good horror movie. In 1967, he wins an Oscar for co-writing In the Heat of the Night, the Sidney Poitier Oscar-winning Best Picture. The next year, he has a writing credit on Charlie. And then he goes on and does things like The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno. And this was actually his follow-up to The Towering Inferno. But this guy would work for a long time and have a very varied career. He worked on the Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry film, The Enforcer. He worked on The Swarm, the Killer Bees movie. And also, this is my favorite one, he worked on Over the Top, the Sylvester Stallone arm wrestling drama.
I had to stop and take that in for a second. There's a Sylvester Stallone film about arm wrestling.
There is. And do you know what going over the top means?
I'm guessing it's arm wrestling parlance. Let's work it out. Let's deduce it. Okay.
No. You turn your hat backwards, and then you
Oh.
take them down.
So it is arm wrestling parlance.
It is, yeah. Like the whole movie is about arm wrestling. It is the Rocky of arm wrestling films.
I feel like the run up the steps and the training montage for arm wrestling is a bit less intense than it is for Rocky.
It's an insane movie. Like, I would recommend anyone watch Over the Top if you haven't seen it. It takes arm wrestling very seriously, and it has like wild characters. It is also since been loosely remade as Real Steel.
No, I've seen that film.
It's a pretty loose remake of Over the Top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is better? You've seen them both, clearly.
I would say Real Steel is probably a little bit of a better movie, but Over the Top is the movie you'll never forget.
It really does push you over the top.
It does, and they actually produced action figures based on Over the Top as well.
Oh, you've got to get one of those.
They're expensive.
Does it have like an arm flexing action or something like that?
They do, of course, and they also sold like a arm wrestling table playset.
I feel like that's such a deep cut for a cinephile or whatever you want to call people that like films, that if you had someone come around your house and they had that set, I feel like you just need to stop there and just like shake their hand, which it would be ironically very strong because they've been practicing.
Yeah, does that handshake turn into an arm wrestle?
They really throw you over the top.
Like, it's insane. Go on eBay and look this stuff up. It's so expensive. It's like, I guess I'll have to stick to my James Bond Jr. figures because they're really cheap. But like something like this, I think they put out that toy line, realized they were complete dogs, and so basically they were only put out in small quantities. And yeah,
there's like tying it back to spy movies. Did you know there was a line of Mission Impossible figures for the 1996 film?
I don't think I did. No,
they are crazy. They are all kinds of different. Like it's like fireman Ethan Hunt,
yeah,
policeman Ethan Hunt,
oh,
like jungle Ethan Hunt.
Oh, of course, the classic jungle scene.
Yeah, who could forget the jungle scene in Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible? And so there are quite a few to collect, and I have had my eye on... This is like a normal standard Ethan Hunt, and the packaging is really nice. I kind of want to keep it like mint in the box and just put it on display, but they sell for like 50 quid a pop, and I just feel like... Yeah, my wife will say, "Hey, do you want to go after it?" I'm like, "Nah, I'm a bit poor at the moment. I haven't got a lot of money." And she'd be like, "Yeah, but you just bought a Mission Impossible figure for £50.
Yeah,
kind of hurts my argument."
That's kind of where I am with over the top figures. Or there was also like a Jingle All the Way Turbo Man figure that's also quite expensive.
I see. I feel like that's, but that's been re-released a few times. I've seen that on like store shelves before.
Sure.
Yeah. I think the Mission Impossible and over-the-top figures are a bit more of a collector's item.
I would say so. So there's no smooth segue out of that one, but we'll talk about Sam Peckinpah, who was a California-born writer, director, and started working on TV in the late 50s. This guy worked on like every Western show ever. Like that
Hmm.
became his specialty, was writing Westerns. And his first motion picture that he worked on was he directed 1961's The Deadly Companions, starring Maureen O'Hara. He also directed Randolph Scott's Ride the High Country, which is really good. I think that came out the following year. And the movie that kind of is the pivotal point for him is 1965's Major Dundee with Charlton Heston. And you would see at that point, it's someone who is kind of pushing against like Western archetypes and wants to challenge them and kind of de-romanticize them.
Mm.
And the movie was taken out of his hands. It exists now in a somewhat reassembled form, but it's not a perfect movie by any stretch. It's a very interesting movie, though. It's actually 1969's The Wild Bunch that really solidifies him as a director, which is starring William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, and Robert Ryan. And it's about three gunslingers who are aging and kind of at that last point of their lives, looking back on sort of the West. And it is just stripped of all sentimentality. It is a grim, dark movie that's very violent and kind of captures one of the specialties of him, which is kind of these dark attributes of men and the way they kind of conduct themselves amongst
Mm.
themselves.
Okay.
And it's something you're going to see perhaps in today's movie as well. It's a common trope of his work. He often had a lot of issues with his female characters, and I think you'll see that in this movie as well. But he basically just, after Straw Dogs, goes on and is making movies like The Getaway and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which I mentioned earlier. This was his follow-up to Garcia, and would go on and do movies like Cross of Iron. And his final motion picture was actually 1983's The Osterman Weekend, which we'll cover on the show in the future. But the thing about Sam Peckinpah was he was a wild man. Like, had severe like drug and alcohol addiction most of his life, died very young at the age of 57. He was someone who brought this kind of reckless vision to his movies. And so his movies are very like pure. Like they are Sam Peckinpah to the core. And he was someone who was a bit of a ticking time bomb and was not likely to be directing these movies
Mm.
into his 80s or 90s.
Well, it's interesting because I watched this film and I'll talk about what I feel about this film in a little while. But there's a documentary on YouTube about this film, about 30 minutes long. I think it's from a wider documentary about the work of Sam Peckinpah, but there's a couple of interviews with some of the cast,
Yeah.
people who worked on the film behind the scenes. It's like a later thing that was done looking back after Sam Peckinpah passed away. And there's a talking head with Ernest Borgnine, who you mentioned earlier. He's not on this film, but has worked with Peckinpah before.
Yeah.
And he was saying, like, Sam had problems with uh, cocaine,
Yeah.
and you would see it offset. He knew how to party, but it never interfered with his work,
Mm-hmm.
and you never saw him jazzed up on set. Like he may have been taking it, but you never saw it affect his directing skills.
Right.
And so that's, I mean, I'm not going to get into drug use, but it's interesting that filmmaking was clearly important to him enough that he didn't let that stuff cloud his work. But obviously, the demons of that overtook his life.
But you can also see it in the work. Like when you watch something like The Wild Bunch, like there's a whole section where it's very like druggy feeling.
Mm,
Like there's something about capturing that energy that he knows so well from his life and bringing that to his work. And like Wild Bunch at the time was like box office bomb and widely criticized for being so dark and violent, and has only in the years since become recognized as a masterpiece.
yeah.
He was sort of bringing his internal demons to the screen in a way that, and it made people kind of uncomfortable.
Well, it's ironic as well that the entire cast and crew, by the sounds of it, were on cocaine during the production of this film.
Hmm.
Cocaine is an upper.
Yeah.
You'd think that would have translated to the film.
This is more of the morning after.
Oh, yeah, this is the come down, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah. And so the only other production notes I had, this was actually the film debut of Vietnamese actress, director, and producer Tiana Alexandra, who was actually married to the screenwriter Sterling Silliphant. And the interesting part of this was she goes on and does a few little acting credits and also worked on a documentary and was actually an associate producer on the David Cronenberg film A Dangerous Method,
Mm.
which was a really good movie. But she met her husband, the screenwriter, through his best friend, Bruce Lee.
Which I have a feeling remotely, as an actor, ties into this film, or his body of work ties into this film a little bit.
I think you may be onto something. This was 2 years after Enter the Dragon, which we covered on the show. And
Hmm.
they were married until his death in 1996 and had 2 kids. So a Hollywood marriage that actually worked.
I do have a small story about Tiana Alexandra-Silliphant, if you would indulge me.
Mm-hmm.
So, a part of this documentary, one thing I read it in the IMDb trivia, but I know you don't trust that, so I don't take that as gospel. But apparently, she wasn't well liked on the set, and she got the role in this film because of backstage politicking, basically.
Sure. Her husband was very powerful at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so I didn't really put any faith in that IMDb trivia note, but in this documentary, they spoke about it too. And I think it was Sam Peckinpah's assistant they were interviewing, and she said during they were shooting one of the first scenes where she was in it, and they were all in a taxi cab together, like James Caan, her, and a couple of the other cast members,
Yep.
and they were all mic'd up. She didn't know the mics were live,
Uh-huh.
and she said to James Caan and the other two actors in the car with her, whilst the entire crew could hear what she was saying, allegedly here, folks, allegedly, that making movies and working in Hollywood is having to be nice to people that you wouldn't shit on. That's going to turn the cast against you very quickly. The crew, I should say. It's definitely going to turn the crew against you very quickly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, okay.
Yeah, so that's probably why that IMDb trivia exists, because it was probably a member of the crew who wrote it into IMDb.
Probably. And she had mostly bit parts and only, I think, 5 or 6 acting credits. But it's, to me, the Dangerous Method credit is the most interesting.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. So this movie had a budget of $5 million. And as I said, we don't know the gross on that, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, not great. Not great, Bob. And the top 3 for the year, number 1 was Jaws. Number 2, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And number 3 was the Warren Beatty film Shampoo. So my only final note on this one was James Caan, in a 1977 interview with Gene Siskel, said he only made this film because his advisors said he should work with Sam Peckinpah, and he gave the movie a 0 out of 10.
So when we throw to James Caan at the end for the knock list, we already know what his vote is, right?
He's going to say 0 chance of making the knock list. That is correct, yes. And he sadly did pass away in 2022, so we'll have to assume the ghost of him is bellowing out for a 0.
Well, in terms of asking him for a knock list vote, we James can't.
Oh, I like it. It's good.
Thank you. I scored that one. I'll take it. But it sounds like we've got the backstory for the Killer Elite. We've assembled our task force. Let's go bananas.
A monkey in the middle.
It's all connecting, folks. But let's talk about the Killer Elite. You know, it's got a lot of goodwill going into it. A director like Sam Peckinpah. Although I will say this is my first Sam Peckinpah film, I think.
Okay.
So
Okay.
is this a good place to start? We'll figure that out. But, you know, James Caan, Robert Duvall, a big cast of people that you may recognize from other things, especially coming off of The Godfather and Godfather Part 2.
Also, this is Burt Young 1 year before Rocky, and he's going to become like an icon for playing Paulie there.
Yep. I figured that's where I knew him from. So that works. And that also connects to the Rocky story from earlier with the arm wrestling film.
That's right.
There we are. It's all connected.
Burt Young always takes it over the top. He turns that hat backwards.
He definitely does. He plays a lot with his hat in this film, so that does make sense. But let's talk about the Killer Elite. I want to throw it to you first because I've already kind of given a little bit of shade towards the film. I want to hear what you think.
I actually enjoyed this movie.
Okay.
I thought the Killer Elite. This is not a perfect movie, but there's a weirdness to it that I found very interesting. It is a movie of mood and 70s oddness. And I think there's going to be so much to dive into when we talk about just the behavior of some of the characters, the relationship. There are a couple characters in this movie that just, to me, like explode off the screen. I was like, this is amazing. And I would watch whole movies with these characters, occupying the frame. I just thought it really had a great sort of exploration, or at least like a portrayal of unique personalities that were interesting to hang out with. This is full-on 70s hangout movie. It is not in a hurry. And I think that's to its detriment in some ways. And we'll talk about the pacing of the last hour of this movie, which is, it's interesting. It is definitely interesting. It is a choice. There is also, I think, some issues going on with the kind of mashing up of the 70s grittiness of this film and kind of the portrayal coming from James Caan in particular, which is so like internal and mumbled and so much just built on small gestures and looks, and mashing that up with like over the top martial arts sequences. It's strange, and a lot of ninja assassin stuff where you go like, wait, what movie am I watching? But to a degree, that kind of potpourri of trends of the 70s coming together doesn't make this a great movie, but it does make it a movie I was transfixed by almost beginning to end.
In a sense of like when you're watching a car crash happen, you're just like, wow, this is happening.
This isn't like a bad movie where I was like, oh, I'm just watching a disaster happen.
Right.
It was more like I was appreciating all the elements going, they don't necessarily merge together, but there's no movie like this. And it offers that in a way. Like you and I have tackled 170 something spy movies at this point in time. I've never seen anything like Killer Elite. This felt entirely unique. And we have tackled 70s stuff before, like The Macintosh Man or Scorpio more recently.
3 Days of the Condor, Parallax View.
Yeah. Like they all have felt pretty unique. And this one felt very specific. I'm going to assume that, like, the screenplay, maybe having the two writers working on it, maybe that's part of the issue. Like, you had two different visions kind of mashing together here. But as directed by Sam Peckinpah, it's like this man is unable to just crank out a genre film. He has to make it kind of unique and quirky and his own style.
Well, going back to IMDb trivia that you can't trust, or maybe you can, one thing I read on there was that a lot of the dialogue was rewritten on set by Sam Peckinpah, Robert Duvall, and James Caan.
Yeah.
Whilst potentially being under the influence, allegedly.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think lends towards more of my distanced view of this film.
It does hold you at a distance, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I completely get where you're coming from with it being interesting. Like, it's not a good film, but an interesting one. And I think there's a very good discussion to be had about that, and maybe we'll try and have a crack at it. But I think in terms of like an overall viewing experience, and I'm not someone who purports to be a cinephile or, someone who I love film. I mean, I wouldn't do a spy movie podcast if I didn't. But I do have a short patience for artsy films. And I feel like this film tested my patience several times. And I said, I wrote in my notes, it feels like a mess.
Yeah.
Tonally, like a contrasting mess, a clash of tone. And, I had moments of this I really enjoyed. There's like standout moments I will remember from this film. It's not a boring film.
When it hits,
yeah,
it hits hard. Yeah.
That bomb sequence with the police officer on the bridge. What is that? It's hilarious.
It's an incredible sequence. And I guess we're kind of jumping ahead to like a thing, but like there's a whole sequence on a bridge where our heroes have, I guess heroes, quote unquote heroes, have gotten away in their armored taxi, and Burt Young pulls over, he's the driver, and realizes there's a bomb underneath the taxi. And so he's trying to get this bomb off, and a motorcycle cop pulls up. And, wants licenses from them and is like telling Burt Young, get out from under the vehicle. And Burt Young's like, no.
There's a bomb under here. What bomb? The one under here.
It turns into like this hilarious sequence where they're handing the bomb to the cop who goes running down the hill to like dispose of it. But there is suspense. Mm-hmm. There's humor. There is just like kind of the lived in, like hands-on feeling. Like you're seeing Burt Young grease all over his hands trying to dismantle this very filthy looking bomb. It feels tactile. It is just like a natural born filmmaker creating this sequence. And it really does stand out a little bit like an island, movie that is often all over the place.
Yeah. And this is where my problem comes. There's moments I enjoy, but I'm trying to view this as a holistic piece, a piece of film. And as an overall 2-hour experience, I didn't go back and watch it again.
Right.
I couldn't bring myself to do it, despite having time to do so. I just felt there wasn't enough in there for me to go back. I eventually went and watched that documentary on YouTube I mentioned, and a couple of clips from bits I just remembered I wanted to revisit just to refresh my memory before this conversation. And I think, I wrote down, and it's interesting you mentioned vibe, like a tone piece. Because I wrote down, people that say things are a vibe or a tone piece, I think are forgiving a film, maybe giving it too much of a pass for what is bad filmmaking.
Sure.
Like Spectre is alleged to be a tone piece, a vibe film.
I don't agree with that.
I don't either. And we've had guests on the show, Griff from Film Speak, who said that it was. And I don't agree with that. I think it's bad filmmaking, and there are moments in Spectre you can enjoy.
Totally.
I think you can translate that same thing to this film. There are moments I can cut out that I like, and I think we'll highlight those and talk about it. Performances, or at least attempts at performances that we could talk about that we liked. But as an overall piece, I don't think this is an enjoyable experience. There's clearly some artistry going on here, and I think that probably comes from Peckinpah and having actors like James Caan in the film. But it just feels like there's either too many things going on at once, or they've got too many ideas they're trying to cram into this thing, because it's got like this nihilistic, pessimistic view of of government that is trying to weave into it, along with trying to have a Hong Kong martial arts film at the same time.
Yeah.
And you've got ninjas jumping around in slow motion. I haven't seen something so ridiculous since I watched that 1993 GoldenEye documentary with the ninjas flying around in slow motion.
Oh, the biopic, the Ian Fleming biopic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Covered that on the Patreon. Cheap plug. So yeah, I don't know. I just didn't enjoy my experience, and ultimately, I find myself not caring about anyone involved in this film. They could have all died, and I would have gone, yeah, all right, yeah.
Is that kind of the point from the 70s aspect, though? Because, like, I don't think you're supposed to be, like, thinking James Caan is, like, the greatest guy ever. Like, he's kind of a piece of crap, right? Like, he's pretty dismissive of, like, these women in his life. He has next to no personality that he really conveys.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of just there for this revenge mission, but even that is kind of futile for him. Like, I don't know if there's a lot to hang on to, other than this man likes to sing a lot, which also felt maybe fueled by some substances behind the scenes, because it's a lot of the time that felt very random when he would just suddenly be wandering around breaking into song for no apparent reason, and his co-stars seemed to be kind of caught off guard by it.
But that sort of pivots me into something I like about this film, and that is the opening 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Before you get the betrayal, which we spoke about briefly in the synopsis, where Robert Duvall's character, and the setup is Robert Duvall and James Caan's characters are buddies like Cam and I,
Sure.
out on missions together every week.
Watching each other get out of the shower, yeah.
Watching each other get out of the shower, watching each other have sex.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
I mean, I would do that, Cam, if, well... I'm waiting.
Well...
well, but there's like a magic happening at that point, right? Like there is a camaraderie, and then it's undercut, and I like that. I like the betrayal. I like everything it's doing there, and I like the recovery. I like the rehabilitation of James Caan's character. But as soon as he learns how to do anything interesting, like the martial arts, and it's probably about the hour mark you mentioned earlier, it just stops being interesting all of a sudden. It feels like it has nothing to say anymore, because it has this concept about betrayal and revenge and wanting to get equal and settle the score, because the idea is James Caan's character is supposed to be so debilitated by this attack that he can never rehabilitate back to becoming an assassin again.
Mm-hmm.
Great premise. He has to overcome the obstacle, fueled by rage. I'm not sure you can see the rage there. I'm not sure James Caan ever portrays rage in this film.
More of a slow burn intensity.
Yeah, which I can see as an acting choice. That's fine. I think if I gave this to a different actor, he would be a bit angrier.
Well, it's such a 70s thing to have a lead character just so internal.
Yeah.
Right? Like, where it's almost like impenetrable, and you're just spending so much of the movie watching just like little gestures to try to figure this person out. And an actor who I thought of a little bit, it's a bigger performance style, but like you watch Tom Hardy, for example, in the new movie The Bike Riders, and it's like he has like gestures or little things he does in almost every scene that tell you more about that character than what is actually being explicitly told to you.
Right. Okay. And so, as I say, I like all this stuff. I like what it's doing, but I won't throw to dislikes. I'll just keep it in the like section. But I do think it spoils that. I think it doesn't use the momentum it builds up in that first portion to carry it through to the end. I think it has no interest in paying off anything in this film, which again, you could go, oh, that's just the 70s, baby.
Yeah.
Cool. But I don't I don't think I like this type of filmmaking. I think maybe that's what it is. Even 3 Days of the Condor, I think is probably the best example of this.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way, but like the best example of spy films from the 1970s. If you take stuff like James Bond out the way, the sort of like pessimistic view of government, that sort of stuff.
I like Parallax View. I thought
Yeah,
that one was very strong.
I don't know if that's necessarily up to 3 Days of the Condor in my book. Maybe it's second to it.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
But this is much lower down for me, and I think it's not interested in completing the story or telling the story succinctly or at least in a way that is satisfying.
Right.
It left me unsatisfied, and I liked this. As I say, I liked the potential of this film. I liked the concept of this film. This guy seeking revenge, he finds the inner strength to rehabilitate himself to the point of being able to be the agent he was before. He even gains an extra skill because he has a cane, and it's played as not a disability. I really like that. It's actually very empowering in a way. Like he actually, there's some language that's used that is not empowering, but that
yeah, that's true.
it is the 1970s. I can isolate that and put it away. But it is saying, you can overcome this physical obstacle and use it as a strength because it uses the cane as a weapon. And that's quite a nice sentiment in many ways. I love all of that. I think it's great.
And the arm brace too. Like I almost was reminded at times of The Dark Knight Rises, where you have Bruce Wayne who's like badly beaten and he's like wearing these like kind of adjustments to be able to physically fight going forward, especially after the Bane encounter. And it's like that almost feels like Christopher Nolan pulling little elements that maybe he saw in a movie like this, for example.
Sure, I never made that connection, but you could well be right. Imagine that being the legacy of this film.
Hey, that's not a bad one. Tying it back to Tom Hardy and comparing him to James Caan.
Yep, very good. So that's, I mean, I guess I'll start off as my first like is the concept. I think it is an intriguing concept. I'm not sure the delivery is correct, and I think I would have approached it differently if I were a filmmaker, if I had any control, or if I was a writer, perhaps. But I'll throw to you something you want to highlight as a like.
Well, I wanted to sort of follow up on what you were saying about the concept, because I actually also agree with you. That opening with Robert Duvall was fantastic. Like, it felt, in some ways to me, reminiscent of another 1970s film we tackled, The Mechanic.
Yes.
Where there is an energy between these two men that I don't really ever quite have a grasp on. I think it's very interesting. You have a scene where they use a slur that's not the kindest, but they say that basically people think they're homosexual because they are sharing a space together, like they're living together. And then they proceed to have a lot of scenes of them having rather homoerotic activities together. And when Robert Duvall turns on James Caan, the mission is that Robert Duvall is going to execute this person they are protecting, and then he's supposed to kill James Caan, but he doesn't do it. Why doesn't he do it? I was reminded the whole time I was watching the Duvall and Caan section of this movie of another movie you and I tackled on the show that was a 1970s film, The Mechanic.
Yep, it's in my notes.
Yeah, sort of the homoerotic vibe going on between the two characters there that's unspoken. It's never acknowledged. And a similar thing was going on here, which maybe lends a little more credence to what is going on with James Caan in this movie. Like, there is something there with these two men. Like, their connection is very strong. We don't know how long they've been working together or living together for that matter. But the fact that like James Caan is very dismissive of the women, he's like, oh yeah, there's women, whatever. I just kind of drop them as I go along. And yet he is so driven to repair himself, to get back at Robert Duvall. And you see, even at the end, when Robert Duvall is shot, he's angry at the guy that shot him. And it's almost like a tender moment when Robert Duvall dies. And there's so much to read into the characters, but the movie is also holding you at arm's length, so you never have a sense as to genuinely what is going on. Similar to The Mechanic, a movie that is kind of similar in some ways. Like, overall, you can look at The Mechanic and say, this movie's a little bit similar to that movie. But I found, like, that setup really compelling, and it kind of had almost like an Ipcris File vibe of, like, this was, like, dirty espionage. This was not luxurious. This was not jet-setting missions. This is like sitting in like kind of run-down surveillance rooms, all that kind of stuff. Like, it felt that kind of, well, it's very 70s, stripped down kind of, atmosphere. But I like that setup. I thought it was so involving.
I mean, ironically, it's how we record this podcast too.
It's true. And we are watching horny ducks all the time.
I can't stop. Quack quack. No, I think it's great, and I think I mean I noted down that hint of homoeroticism between the two of them too, and
Hmm.
the mechanic connection. I mean, at least with the mechanic, there was a version of that screenplay that had that story in it, that love story, the unrequited love story between the two of them.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think that ever really existed with this. I think that's more just male companionship in this era is rare.
Mm. Yeah.
And so you read into it like that. But I could see a reading of this where you could say it's queer coded. I could absolutely see that. I take it as more just just two people who have like a strong bond and that is betrayed and broken because of his betrayal for money, and that there is a sense of wanting redemption. But I could see that being taken either way, really. I'd be interested to hear what people who are checking out the film for this review think about that.
To me, that's a strength of the movie,
Yeah.
is that you can have those discussions as to what is actually driving these two individuals, because I think it is interesting.
No, I agree, and I think like films now are so machine tooled, as you like to say, that there is no room for ambiguity or
Hmm.
discussion. They have to plainly state their intention, so much so that it smacks you in the face from time to time with messaging and stuff like that. This I give it credit for at least being like, hey, you read what you want to this.
Yeah. Yeah, to me that is a strength of the movie, and I'll hop over to my big like for the movie, which
Big
is kind of
like.
two likes. It's kind of two likes, and that is two of the performances in this movie I absolutely loved. So let's start with number one, which was Bo Hopkins as Jerome Miller,
Bingo.
who is incredible. He's introduced in a beautiful shot, shooting down clay pigeons in front of the Golden Gate Bridge.
I had to note down. There's
Oh,
no way anyone ever does that. By the way, like that, I
right?
swear that'd get you arrested.
Yeah, and he is like someone who is sociopathic, possibly psychotic. We don't exactly know. He is like referred to as the patron poet of manic depressives, and is clearly someone who is like kind of a gun nut, a little bit of a loose cannon, but also like a very smooth operator. There's a point where they're held up by a quote unquote police officer, and this character Jerome just shoots down the guy in the police officer uniform and is like, not a cop, not the right gun. And so it's like, wow, I would kind of want that guy on my side if I'm going into the kind of missions these guys are on. But like every scene of him, I was transfixed by this actor. What an interesting approach to this type of character. I've never seen anyone like this in a spy movie. And he just has this like kind of gentleness, almost like childlike naivety that comes across in every scene, and yet he's the most deadly individual there.
Hmm.
I loved this character.
I think he was great. He is probably my favorite character in the film. There's a couple of other standout performances I would point towards, but yeah, like it's one thing these films in this era do really well, and we spoke about the spy connections and things it reminds us of, but this film also reminds me a lot of the Dirty Harry films,
Yeah, totally.
and just I mean San Francisco, obviously, it's the same setting, but like it just how the world is just fleshed out by these interesting people. You look at Andrew Robinson in Dirty Harry, the first film,
Yeah.
like complete psychopath, but it's you don't see any other psychopaths like Andrew Robinson's character in that film. You do not see anyone like Bo Hopkins in any other film, particularly. He is deranged, but also very enjoyable to watch.
And he seems like you'd want him with you.
If you're doing this mission, yes.
Yeah, there's no one better.
Not for anything else though. I don't want to take him out for dinner
No.
or for him to change my bedpan. Like no.
And there's the scene at the end where he shoots down Robert Duvall. And James Caan punches Jerome out for doing so. But I'm like, you feel bad in that moment for Jerome. He seems so gentle when James Caan hits him, even though he's the deadliest character in the movie.
I feel like James Caan knows he shouldn't really mess with him.
I think so too.
Yeah, and there was a different ending shot. Did you read about that?
No, I didn't. Tell me about it.
They shot an extra ending where, because at the end, towards the end of the film, Bo Hopkins' character is shot
Yeah.
and killed. They shot an additional scene where, as they're getting back on the boat at the end, he crawls onto the boat.
Yeah.
Like he got hit, but he didn't die. And they make a joke, and then I think the shot is they push him back into the water as like a joke.
Okay.
And that was just cut out because I mean, this film didn't need to be any longer, so that was a good move.
No, it's also like a pretty merciless film. Like when
Mm.
people die, and I think it's better to do that. If the character is shot like that, you don't want to then. You don't want to do the Jaws the Revenge with Mario Van Peebles, where depending on the cut of the movie, the character lives or not.
Yeah, you do not want that.
And then the other character that really leaped out to me, this could only happen in this era. You would never again have Burt Young showing up as an operative who is fighting ninjas. Which
And
is
winning.
insane. And winning with a very clear stunt double.
Oh,
It's incredible. It is like early Star Trek where you see Shatner suddenly cut to like a guy who's like 6'7" doing fight scenes. Like it's so obvious. But like Burt Young in this brings an energy that is unmistakable. It is that kind of just like worn down, world weary, guy next door kind of vibe that is just incredible to see in a spy movie.
Guy next door. What neighborhood are you living in?
You don't want to know, Scott. These are the
Oh.
rough streets over here in North Vancouver. But I wish I had Burt Young living next to me. Every night's like I Am Legend. But like this guy, there's not. Burt Young always looked like he was 50 years old, even when he was probably like 31 in this or something like that.
Mm.
But he's incredible, and just that scene of taking the bomb off the car, how he's kind of the voice of reason to James Caan throughout the film. I was really into this, and it's only a time period like this you would get actors like this popping up in a spy movie. Like when you start moving forward, they're like, what does a spy look like? A spy looks like James Bond or Arnold Schwarzenegger or, action heroes, people that look like they could take on ninjas in a physical fight. In the 70s, they're like, get us Burt Young.
I love what he's doing with the character. I have issues with his mumbling all the way through the film.
Oh,
It's hard to hear what he's saying a lot of the time.
I found James Caan harder to understand than him.
Okay, mumble off, folks. Let us know who is the biggest mumbler in the Killer Elite. We want to hear from you. But I mean, apart from the fact that the guy adjusts his hat more often than Michael Flatley in Blackbird, which is I know is a reference you don't get because you haven't seen the film yet, but the Blackbird watchers will know exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm disappointed. Blackbird really didn't make any blip over here in North America.
It didn't make a blip here either, except for just memes.
Yeah, but you have memes. Like there was showings. People were going to see it in the UK. Whereas like here, it did nothing.
I mean, I think it is available on VOD now. I think we can get around to actually reviewing it at some point.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
But yeah. But again, it goes back to what I said before about Dirty Harry. You wouldn't get a film in a different decade with this sort of colorful character. Not that he is colorful. He is as drab as they go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is a walking beige palette. You know what I mean? He is gross. He is disgusting in a sense of like, I could smell him.
His attire when he shows up to see James Caan in the hospital and he's wearing like a fedora, like
checkered pants, I think.
Pinstriped.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think he had like, was it a leather jacket or was it something else? Whatever it was a hell of an ensemble.
You're like a pimp.
Sort of, but not glamorous. Like,
oh no,
in the
no,
70s,
like
they would have been
pimp.
played up like puffy or like like more like colorful clothes or garish looking. This guy looked like he'd gone to like a thrift store and just pulled out random articles of clothing.
He's an unsuccessful pimp.
Oh, okay. That lines up. Yeah,
yeah, for sure. But yeah, I think both performances are great and are things to look out for in the film and things that will sort of keep you going throughout your viewing experience.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I was completely locked in when they were on screen with James Caan.
I just want to tip my hat to just the look of the film. I think the cinematography from Philip H. Lathrop, credited as Philip Lathrop, was great. He has been nominated for 2 Oscars. He did Pink Panther, The Driver, Earthquake, a bunch of other films I could list.
It's interesting, Pink Panther is a really nice looking movie, but is in no way similar to this. It kind of shows you that he had some definite versatility. I guess The Driver is a little more in line with this.
Well, he was nominated twice for an Academy Award, once for the Americanization of Emily and once for Earthquake.
Okay. I'd be curious if Earthquake looks that visually spectacular these days, but I'll take
Mhm.
take their word for it.
But yeah, I just think like it's not a. I mean, it's still a grimy looking film. It's still got that 70s aesthetic going, but
Hmm.
it does have at times has a beautiful way of capturing San Francisco. You mentioned that shot where you meet Bo Hopkins' character as he's standing by the Golden Gate Bridge doing clay pigeon shooting, and it's basically the same matte painting they use for Starfleet Academy. Yes, folks, I couldn't go an episode without mentioning Star Trek, and it's that same shot, and I just love seeing that shot anyway. But there's like a couple of shots where they're like looking over the hills of San Francisco, and they've got these long takes of just like panning over the different hills, all the way down the long winding streets,
Yep.
and they're taking time to do those shots. Another film would just you know get to the business.
Yeah, well, this movie has plenty of time for really evocative establishing shots. One of the ones that I think is really worth mentioning was the like ship graveyard or whatever it was at the end of the movie,
Yep.
where it's like just these hulking wrecks in the ocean, and there's just no life on them whatsoever. It's very eerie, and you have like our heroes in their little boat going up around there. I'm like, this location like is incredible. I've never
Yeah.
seen something that looks like this in a movie. And again, it's like Sam Peckinpah just knows how to create an image. And you see that throughout the movie. Even when the movie is dragging its feet, like just dragging its feet, he's like, how do I make this look beautiful?
Well, that entire ending at the boat graveyard or whatever you'd like to call it, like they're basically decommissioned ships that are going to be taken down and scrapped.
Yeah.
That entire ending is absolute nonsense.
That's where Burt Young is fighting the ninjas, yeah.
Right, exactly. But there's also like slow-mo fighting and stuff. It really is insane. But I mean, boy, did they pick a good setting for it at least. So you can admire the shots of the boats. And it reminds me a lot of, not necessarily in filmmaking, but in terms of an eye for a location. When they shot on the reconstruction of the Statue of Liberty in Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins,
Oh yeah.
like
Yeah.
that was just happening randomly whilst they shot the film. They're like, "Hey, let's do the fight there," and they obviously remade a lot of that in a set, but they did shoot on location as they were I think they were taking some of the iron off, or basically they were painting it or something. But they had scaffolding all over the Statue of Liberty, and they used it to full effect. This was just an actual boat graveyard that was there for a few years that was sent to be decommissioned eventually. And Peckinpah must have heard about it, or the cinematographer thought, "Hey, this is a great setting for a showdown."
I also thought of a movie that came out 1 year before this, which was The Man with the Golden Gun, and that tipped over ship in the harbor that
Right.
they use as the Bond team's headquarters. Like
Hmm.
that is such a like beautiful location as well. It looks incredible on film. And yeah, like, I don't know how much of Killer Elite will stick in my mind a decade from now, but I will remember that ship graveyard.
No, I think I will too. And I mean, the last thing I want to mention is just sort of moments that still stand out. We said the cop bomb scene.
Yeah.
I also think the shootout in the taxi outside of the sort of restaurant or wherever it is they're all hiding, with
Yeah.
Robert Duvall on the roof and James Caan in the taxi outside, and there's basically a car chase that happens afterwards with the taxi. I think it's fantastic. It looks great.
It felt like real guns too. Like I
Yeah.
kept thinking of the movie Heat, which has the big shootout after the robbery goes wrong. And Michael Mann always wants authenticity and real like gun sounds to it. I don't know if that's 100% the case here, but like it felt dangerous and like real world. And when you had like James Caan pinned in, basically saying "Go, go, go," and Burt Young be like, "Nope, not leaving, not leaving," you could feel those like bullets going back and forth. It didn't feel just like a pumped up action scene.
No, no, it felt like you were in that taxi cab with them. It was very claustrophobic because of the high walls of the streets as well. Like I just think it was a very well staged shootout.
Well, it's like Sam Peckinpah could really communicate on screen violence very well and with a brutality that was in its time pretty shocking.
Hmm.
And I think like a sequence like this really holds up very well. I will say another thing I did like was when it came to the CIA superiors or the people overseeing Comtech, the organization that James Caan works for.
That doesn't
It was
exist.
great.
It has to remind
That
you that
doesn't
it doesn't
exist.
exist.
Doesn't exist. That was a weird opening with the interview
It
stuff. But
was.
anyways, great casting with those actors playing the people in charge.
Hmm.
Just kind of like unremarkable looking guys, just they all look like older white dudes, but they all had like kind of distinctive looks, and you could buy them being in charge of these organizations and just having their souls drained over the years.
Yeah, I think they were both great, and I kept thinking that the actor Arthur Hill, who plays Captain or Cap Collis, who the one who's actually the behind the ultimate betrayal of the film, I kept
Yeah.
thinking he was the same actor that played the guy with the eye patch glasses in The Chairman, which I looked up,
Oh,
and lo and behold, it was.
that's right. That's right. I mean, I didn't recognize him without that one eye, one dark eyeglass.
Yeah, I thought like, "Hey, is this the same guy? Is that the same guy?" And then I went and looked, and yeah. So my spy movie instinct paid off for once, which was nice. So it's nice to see a continuity with the most dangerous man in the world through to the Killer Elite.
Yeah, like those characters don't pop the way that like Jerome or Burt Young's character Mac do, but like it's great casting.
Yeah, yeah, it's perfect sort of spy movie casting for the dudes in the boardrooms, if you know what I mean.
Totally. Like, and we've seen so many movies where it's very, even if it's great actors, they all come across as very boring, and these individuals never felt boring.
No, absolutely. And the last thing I'll mention before I take us over is, I guess it's a Peckinpah thing. He knows how to get the setting right, because this film is full of three things to really attenuate you to the decade. And that is disco,
Yeah.
mustaches,
Yeah.
and ninjas.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. And weird sex clubs.
Well, we know what you were doing in the 1970s, Cam.
I wasn't alive, damn it.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red Alert Spy Hards, we are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Scott, this is a quirky one. We are going to look at the 1992 Lifetime TV remake of Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. How does 90s Lex Luthor compare to Cary Grant? We're going to find out, I guess.
So don't get left out in the cold. Help support your favorite spy movie podcast and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, let's get back to the spy jinx. Okay, let's talk about dislikes, things that we didn't like about the Killer Elite. Now, we have mentioned a couple of things already, but let's dive in further. Cam, why don't you lead us off?
The ninja stuff just doesn't work.
No.
I mean, Sam Peckinpah, as I talked about in the behind the scenes, this man understood to the core Western storytelling. And I mean, like, Westerns. And I mean, like, when he creates those types of movies, they have a authenticity that feels real and lived in and understood.
Uh-huh.
When I watch Sam Peckinpah dealing with ninja assassins, it's very clear he just doesn't really get it.
No.
And this is only, 2 years after Into the Dragon? So it's kind of like a craze that's popped up, but like it felt like an older filmmaker being kind of given this idea. He doesn't get it. He's not staging the action scenes in particularly exciting ways. And I just don't know that anyone involved behind the scenes knew how to make this work and merge it with kind of the grittier lived-in character drama that I think Sam Peckinpah probably signed up to make versus the ninja stuff.
No, plus when you add in the on-set changes and stuff like that, I could see how this got very murky in its final product. And I read another note on IMDb. Again, is it true? We don't know. Apparently, to prepare for this, Sam Peckinpah watched a bunch of Hong Kong action films,
Yeah, okay.
which you could totally see as an influence. I just don't know if he knows what to do with those set pieces or how to put them into this film. There's a moment where you sort of first get the ninjas as an attempted assassination at the airport of the person they're trying to protect throughout the film. And there's like a voiceover the entire time, and moments are in slow motion. Other moments aren't in slow motion. The choreography and the geography of the action sequence are all over the place. It's really hard to just understand what's going on. And from what I can tell, from all intents and purposes, Sam Peckinpah could do action.
Oh yeah, we see it.
Right. But I don't think it had to do this action.
Well, and yeah, it's like when you have damaged men committing violence against each other, I feel like Sam Peckinpah is like, I got this.
Yeah.
I understand how to make this work. Whereas when it comes to like, like Japanese culture and ninjas, he's just like, they kick a lot. Like, I don't know. I don't understand. Like, it feels like someone who maybe watched some movies, picked up some things along the way, but like doesn't genuinely get it.
No, I think he doesn't. I think maybe he understands what he likes about it, but doesn't know how to stage it in his own films.
Yeah.
And I can add a little bit of behind the scenes to contextualize maybe why it didn't work.
Right.
Again, in this documentary, and I'll try and link it up on social media at some point this week. Basically, to prepare for this film, to get all of the martial artists, Sam Peckinpah basically went to New York and hired all of the martial artists that were available to work on film.
Yep.
Unfortunately, they came from about 4 different disciplines.
Yeah. Okay.
So there was a real mix of ways of working and communication, and it just didn't like come together. People were like, it was like karate. There was there's a list online, you can go find it. Different disciplines basically, and you'd think, oh, that shouldn't be a problem, but there obviously wasn't a real like martial artist fight choreographer working on the film. So it sounds like there was a lot of people just sort of making stuff up, like, oh, let the martial artists just figure it out, which is fine. They can put something together, but does it translate to a lens, and then does it then translate to a film?
It also felt like there was some blending of Asian cultures in this movie that it's just like a 1970s filmmaker is going to do, but not really think through and not even necessarily grasp. And you could feel that in the movie. And just the fact that you're like building up ninjas as this threat. And to be honest with you, I didn't really understand a lot of what was going on with the politics of this. Because I believe, because I had to look this up, that it was like a Taiwanese diplomat that they were after. And I'm like, okay, now I'm just confused what they're even doing in this movie. But like, you have Burt Young taking down these ninjas easily on screen. That just removes all threat of these ninjas. So it's also like he just doesn't understand that these should be something that should be fearsome. Like you should, when you see the ninjas coming, you should be like, oh my God, no. Like they are going to kill us all.
Yeah, whereas instead they just sort of play out like the putties in Power Rangers, where like one kick to the chest and they're all dead.
Yeah.
It's very badly done. And there's a moment, early on during his rehabilitation, James Caan meets some sort of master doing what looks like Tai Chi in the middle of a street, like a thoroughfare.
Like the location.
In San Francisco somewhere.
Yeah, good location.
Very lovely location. Great location. And then trains with this guy and learns how to do some martial arts and self-defense thing, uses his cane as an implement. And he's asked, like, why are you learning this stuff? What happens if a guy is 20 feet away from you? This hand-to-hand combat's useless. And he goes, well, I'd shoot the guy.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so this is just a setup to pay off the fight sequence that's going to come later, which it does. But I don't think it needs to happen. And also, a lot of the time, they really undercut the whole point of having these ninjas because he just shoots them.
Yeah, totally. And then also you have Mako as like this politician that needs to be protected, who's kind of wasted in this movie. He doesn't really get anything interesting to do. But like his daughter, played by Tiana Alexandra-Silliphant, who we mentioned earlier, is very like trained and capable of ninja-like duties. And yet we see at the end she suits up and goes into action, and they're like, oh, geez, what is she doing? Immediately caught.
Yeah.
So they're also undercutting her danger as well. And I'm like, well, okay, that doesn't benefit your movie.
No. That could have been to do with the problems on set. Who knows? But suffice to say, the ninjas don't work.
The ninjas do not work.
No, sir. My 2 big dislikes, seeing as you went with 2 likes, I'll go with 2 big dislikes. And they are somewhat connected, but I'll just sort of spell them both out. One kind of leads into the other. Firstly being the pacing of this film. It does not need to be 2 hours long. There is a whole, like, the boat sequence we mentioned. Preceding that, there is a whole 20 minutes, like, back and forth in some sort of scrap yard or something like that, where there's like a waiting game where like they're waiting to be attacked and they're holding down this place inside the scrapyard. You could have combined both sequences together.
Yeah, I think I noticed the pacing in the back half.
Yeah.
Much more so. Like, I didn't mind all the stuff of James Caan recuperating.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, some people could complain about that, but I was actually really into that just from a character standpoint.
It's character stuff, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was spending time with him. But when we get to the end, you want some propulsion going on, leading into those action scenes, and there's not. It's like really just taking its time, walking slowly from set piece to set piece. And that does, I think, hurt the movie's ultimate intention. I think it wants to be somewhat bracing and exciting at the end, and it really, shoots itself in the foot there.
Yeah, it loses all sense of momentum come the sort of 90-minute mark, maybe a bit less.
Yeah.
Because it has two endings.
Yeah, that's true. Like, there's the Robert Duvall ending to what happens to his character, and then the big, ship graveyard ninja battle. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a funny sentence to say.
It is, and I look forward to saying more bizarre sentences like that in the future of the podcast.
There we go. And the other thing I wanted to sort of mention, which was tied into the face, is that sort of anticlimactic double ending. I think these are kind of a connected set of dislikes, because I think really what this boils down to is someone should have edited this. It did have an editor, I'm sure, but like it needed someone who could overrule Sam Peckinpah, which is probably half the problem here, and say no, this is just too much. Because this film is trying to be a character piece. I totally get that. And to have a character piece, sometimes you need to spend time with your characters. But these are just two protracted fight sequences that aren't interesting.
Well, it's like Sam Peckinpah made movies often that were very meditative, where it was about just being there and witnessing kind of the slow unfolding of events. And that works better in the first half than the second. And the second half needs to pick up a little bit, especially in a movie like this, where you're pretty much giving away to formula in the back half.
Yeah, because it has to pay off everything it sets up early on.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, then I think they had to figure out a way of doing it more coherently and more in a way that is propulsive.
Yeah.
Because, and I know, like, ironically, we're sitting here talking about it and taking our time talking about it. We're longing this out too. But it really, what it does to me is stings, because it has such promise at the start. And it just, like, it's an open goal. You could just kick it in and you'd be fine. But instead, you're, like, doing funny flips and trying to style it out whilst you do it. And then you end up falling on your face. I don't know why I make a sports metaphor. I don't watch sports. Maybe you can tell.
Go team, go. And also, like, I don't necessarily even think you have to cut, runtime of the movie. I would have actually preferred a little more coherency in terms of what is going on behind the scenes with the spy plot, because I found it so murky that at a point I just was like, I just have to go on faith on this one, because I didn't really grasp why the Cap Collis character is like basically betting on both sides. Like, what does he get out of this?
Well, it's hardly ever spelled out.
No,
it's part of the problem. Like, it really, I think there's like a throwaway line that sort of says what's happening, but you have to be paying serious attention to hear it. And it's at the point in the film where your interest is dwindling.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we have to live in the world like we do now, where they have to restate a point 3 times just so it drives it home to the viewer. Please don't make us go through that again. But make it clear. Like, there is a double turn in this film, right? Unless I had to go and read the IMDb synopsis afterwards in the Wikipedia entry just to really make sure I understood it. You shouldn't have to do that with any film.
No. And I felt that way towards what was going on with the CIA and Comtag, but I also felt that in terms of sort of setting up the conflict with the ninjas and the diplomat.
Yeah. I mean, you could pick a ton of films that we've watched over the years on Spy Hards that have these labyrinthian plots. And that's absolutely fine if you can deliver it in a way that's digestible and understandable. They wanted to have this twisty-turny spy plot, but they just didn't know how to deliver it. And that maybe that's the writing, maybe that's the directing. I don't know who that falls to, but ultimately it falls flat. And if you're falling flat on your action sequences, you're too long, and your plot's incoherent, you are, as we both said at the beginning, holding people at arm's length.
And this same year, you get 3 Days of the Condor, which also is, quite a complex spy plot, but you can follow it every step of the way.
Yeah, it is remarkably easy to digest.
And it's not stopping the movie dead over and over again to explain it to you.
No.
It makes it all just perfectly woven into the fabric of the movie, so you're following a story. Whereas here, it feels like certain story elements may have even gotten lost in the shuffle.
And I'll tie this up with my last dislike, and ties into 3 Days of the Condor quite well, because Robert Redford's lead in that is a very understandable person,
Hmm.
much as he is a super genius, and you or I can't understand that at all. Uh, you understand what he's going through and the pressures that are facing his character. I have a problem with James Caan's performance in this. I know you said you quite liked it, and I like what he's doing at the start, but there is this sort of like he's tried to be Clint Eastwood,
Yeah.
like less is more.
Yeah.
And I just feel like this probably needed a bit more of a dynamic performance
Hmm.
to sell the anger, the betrayal, and also the energized feeling he had by the end. Whereas he gets his comeuppance and wins the day and beats the bad guys, he barely even cracks a smile,
That's true. I was wondering, is the title ironic?
as in they're not elite.
Yeah, because like you've got Burt Young, you've got Jerome. These are not necessarily these like unstoppable killing machines the way you might think about in the world of spycraft. And James Caan is more athletic looking, but he's also been someone who's been shot in the arm and the knee, so he's got braces. He's got like a I don't even know what is that called on his arm.
I would say it's a brace.
Oh, it's a brace as well. Okay, so yeah, he's got like 2 braces going on. He's someone who is limited in his ability to essentially kill.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have all these kind of characters that occupy this world. It's the ninjas in theory would fall more into the killer elite to me, but they aren't conveyed in a way where you really think that. So I was wondering if it's almost more like in this world of spies, these guys are kind of like beaten down, and the title is almost more ironic.
Like a Coen Brothers film. Like, this is the elite.
Sort of. Because, like,
Yeah.
when you think the elite...
Satirical.
And this movie does have satire going on. You look at that bizarre opening with the interview, the whole "this would have never happened" kind of disclaimer. There's some interesting kind of jabs of comedy that feel, I don't know that they're fully baked into the overall picture, but like
The cop sequence is satirical.
definitely. And so I wonder if the Killer Elite title is also intended to be so.
I think maybe this isn't the era where people were writing to a higher standard usually. So maybe that could be the case, but also maybe it could just be they were trying to have a cool name like men's deodorant.
Sure. And just out of curiosity, who do you think was the monkey in the middle? I mean, I assume it's James Caan, right?
I'd say it's probably more Jerome Miller.
That works.
Like, he's very happy. He's just out there having fun.
Yeah, he's like those monkeys with the symbols like clashing back and forth. He's just happy.
Yeah, but instead of symbols, they're grenades.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's very happy to do it. That's my pick. Bo Hopkins, you're my MVP of the film for sure. Final notes before we get to the knock list. Cam, what do you have?
I have a couple notes. Scott, when I saw the opening credits of this movie listing the cast, and I saw Tom Clancy,
Yeah,
I was like, what? Like, what? I didn't realize he acted. And I sat there the whole movie being like, where's Tom Clancy? And then it was after the movie that I looked it up and realized it's another actor by the name of Tom Clancy.
I had the exact same thought process, but I realized kind of the way through that I don't think I know what Tom Clancy looks like.
I don't really either, but I felt like I could pick him out, and because he'd probably not the most natural of actors. And so I was a little let down when I realized it was not the the author who, of course, created Jack Ryan.
Okay, if Tom Clancy was in this film, what character would he be playing?
One of the ninjas. No. It's the 70s, right?
Yeah.
No. He would have been playing I think just like one of the like bureaucrats. Maybe there's like the guy from the CIA who comes to talk to the Comtech guys. Like maybe that guy.
Maybe. I was thinking more towards the Bo Hopkins character, just because, he's got some military history, might be good with guns.
Too big a role. I think it would be a smaller role.
Oh, you're talking about the reality of like how he would handle it as an actor. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That works for me. And what else do you have?
The other point I had was the 70s party scene was weird. Because we have the opening party they're hanging out at. Who are all those women? Like, I thought that was kind of odd. I don't know what's going on there. And then there's also like the sex club they're hanging out at, and I'm just like, the 70s was a vibe that I just don't know that I would have been able to get on board with.
I think you're just stuck up, man.
I think so.
You don't get invited to places.
It is just like, it seems almost like feverish. I'm like, what am I watching?
Well, things were a lot looser then. You're coming off of the hippie movement in the 60s, I guess.
Yeah.
So there is that going on. It seems like an enjoyable time to live if you're into that sort of thing.
I suppose so. It doesn't seem like appealing though. It seems like kind of grungy.
A little bit, but also you got to think people haven't got their phones at this point. So like, what else are you going to do in the evening? Oh, I'll go to a sex party, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why it's always interesting going back to these 70s movies and seeing how much of that is there. Remember in the Dirty Harry movies, like every movie, he was like crashing into a porn shoot or like winding up in a sex club or seeing like a threesome or something through his window. Like there was always something going on. And I guess both movies are set in San Francisco, so clearly the filmmakers were like, all the wild stuff's going down in San Francisco.
I know where we're going on holiday next year.
Party down. I'll grow a mustache.
Well, the last note I had whilst you're growing that mustache, I'll just throw out. Sam Peckinpah's son was in this film.
Okay.
Can you pick out who he was?
I'm trying to think of like age-wise. He would have been probably like quite young. 20 or something like that, or maybe younger.
I'll help out. Go a bit younger.
Okay. God, I'm trying to think of like teenagers or kids in the in the Killer Elite. There's not many. Everyone's like 58 years old.
Yeah. Well, everyone looked 58 years old in the 70s. To be fair, they all could be 12.
Yeah, totally.
Go take a guess. See if you can figure it out.
He better not have been at that party. That's for sure.
Oh, he was the host.
Yeah, it was the 70s. Honestly, I can't think of a single young character other than maybe an extra when he's at the restaurant with the nurse.
Okay, so you're giving up?
Yeah.
Okay, he is the kid who throws the cane back to James Caan.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Small cameo, but fun little note for when you guys all rewatch the film, which I'm sure you'll do immediately after this episode.
Obviously.
But the final question has arrived. Knock list. Is Killer Elite making the list, joining the other 70s films like 3 Days of the Condor and the Parallax View on the list of the greatest spy movies of all time? Cam, what do you say?
It's a no for me. I think for all the reasons we've cited, it just is kind of a bit of a mishmash, but it's a movie that I enjoyed watching, and I could see myself watching, not tomorrow, but further down the road. I liked it more than Scorpio by, I think, a bit of a considerable margin, and I think it's probably a little bit better than The Macintosh Man, but it is interesting how we've come across these 70s spy films that are pretty forgotten. And even though they have massive stars, or in some cases like this, huge directors, and they just haven't really stood the test of time in terms of people remembering them. But this is one that I think is, for those that are really curious and want to dive into kind of more of the the crevices of spy cinema, this is one worth checking out.
It's one of the decades, much like the 1950s. It just doesn't have as many spy films going on.
Yeah.
As other, like the 80s or the 60s.
They're either great or they're completely forgotten, it seems.
Yeah. And maybe that's something to do with the fact that what was happening in real life at that time with Watergate and things like that was just actually stranger than fiction. People didn't want to hear about the realities of spycraft because it was just like too close to home.
Yeah.
Stuff like The Conversation. It really is, pointing a finger at establishment and saying, hey, what are you guys doing?
Mm-hmm.
For 3 Days of the Condor as well. So, yeah. It's an interesting decade for sure, but that's a no. So I guess it probably won't make it, but I'll see what I say, and I'm going to say no. Unsurprisingly, I think there are moments to enjoy here. I think it's a 2-hour film that shouldn't be 2 hours, but I think those who are diving deeper into the depths of spy movies, this is maybe one to check out if you love that sort of pessimistic 70s vibe. This is definitely on that wavelength.
Oh, yeah.
So you'll probably enjoy it from that perspective, if that is your bag.
Oh, definitely.
So to speak. But other than that, I don't think I could really recommend it. Certainly not in the list of the greatest spy movies of all time. And so that's 2 no's. The Killer Elite is not making the knock list. The dossier on the film is complete and filed as classified. You can all put your bedpans away.
Or we may need them because
Well,
I'm getting older, Scott.
well, time is ticking as Cam is very much aware by the sounds of it. So throwing it over to you, sir. What are we tackling next week?
With Deadpool and Wolverine about to charge into theaters like a juggernaut and earn like $1 billion, we thought it would be a great time to tap into a little bit of synergy. We are going to explore 2011's X-Men First Class, which was directed by Matthew Vaughn and features all sorts of 60s spy-fi elements that it's drawing from. I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and it's a franchise that is always exhilarating.
That's right, folks. Next week's a big week. Deadpool and Wolverine is dropping in theaters, so we thought we'd tie in a little bit with the marketing and give you exactly what you want, and that is an exorbitant amount of X-Men coverage. We will be taking a look at X-Men First Class. I think personally one of the best X-Men films, but we'll talk about that next week from 2011. Plus, later in the week, we will be joined by one of the film's screenwriters, Mr. Ashley Miller, one of the co-hosts of Inglorious Trexperts and friend of the show. A very insightful interview. I mean, if you're talking about a film school Spy Hard special right there, that is the one to listen to, and there are some secrets revealed about X-Men history that have never before been spoken. There are some exclusives in there, so if you like your X-Men, it's one to tune in for. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week as we take a look at X-Men First Class. If you like what you heard on this show, we'd love it if you joined us over on our Patreon page. We're coming up to 100 bonus episodes over there, available at our $6 category and above. You can gain access to right away, plus 3 bonus episodes coming every month as well. And we're not doing this for profit. All of the money we make goes back into the show, and we keep getting hit by more and more bills to keep Spy Hards running. So really, it is just about keeping the show going, and we appreciate each and every person that has come on and supported us over the years on the Patreon. Thank you all. You are all kings and queens in my book. So make sure you find out about the Patreon. There's a link in the show notes below, or you can go to patreon.com/spyhards and become an agent today. And speaking of agents, make sure you follow us discreetly on social media at Spyhards. That's SPYHARDS on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, folks, you'll find Cam and I watching The Naughty Duck Show.